In this lecture, we're going to be studying ecology, which is the interaction of organisms with their environment. And specifically, in Chapter 18 lecture, we're going to focus on ecology at the organismal and population level. Like I said before, ecology is the study of interactions between organisms and their environments. And the environment is divided into two major components. The first is what we call abiotic factors, which are the non-living chemical and physical parts of the environment. So like light, temperature, water, minerals, air. All of these are non-living components of the environment, but they do have an effect on the living components and the organisms that live in that environment. So I hinted at this second part. The second part of the environment is called the biotic factors, which include all the living things, from plants to protists, bacteria to animals. These are the living factors or the biotic factors of an environment. Now, ecology can be divided into four increasingly comprehensive levels. At the smallest level, we have ecology at the organismal level, where we just look at the organisms, one particular organism in an environment. Then we could take a look at those organisms on the population level. A little further, a little broader perspective is the community level. So all of the animals and plants and stuff that interact with each other in a specific area. And then finally, the biggest level that we can take a look at and study ecology at is the ecosystem level, which is like an entire area or ecosystem, and how the abiotic and biotic factors are influencing each other. So a little bit more about the ecology at the organism level. Organismal ecology is concerned with the adaptations that enable individual organisms to meet the challenges posed by their abiotic environments. So we're going to be looking at specific animals and plants and how they have adapted in order to survive their particular environments. Now, ecology at the population level is going to focus on a group of individuals of the same species living in a particular area. And so we can think of these little mice on the right living in a little wooded area. So population ecology is basically going to concentrate mainly on the factors that affect population density and growth. Okay, whether how populations are going to increase or decrease, and how many individuals in that population there's going to be. When we look at ecology at the community level, we're going to take a look at all of the organisms that inhabit a particular area. So instead of looking just at the population of mice in a little wooded area, we're going to take a look at the population of mice and owls and foxes and fungi and trees and all that stuff. And so we're going to take a look at how they interact with each other. So how predation works, competition, symbiosis, and how that's going to affect the structure and organization of that particular area of the ecosystem. And finally, the biggest, broadest viewpoint of ecology that we can study is the ecosystem, and that's going to include all the abiotic and biotic factors in a particular area. So we're not going to just take a look at the living organisms, we're going to take a look at the abiotic factors as well. So all the chemicals, how carbon cycles, how nitrogen cycles, phosphate, all those specific chemicals that living organisms are going to rely on. We're going to take a look at weather and how that affects the species in that particular area, temperature, all that stuff. So, the main questions that concern us are, energy flow and the cycling of chemicals between the living and the non-living parts of the environment. So that's at the ecosystem level. Now, we can look at all of the ecosystems together, and that makes what we call a biosphere. A biosphere is the global ecosystem, the sum of all the planet's ecosystems. So it's the most even most complex level of ecology. And so we're going to include in that, how the atmosphere affects, abiotic and biotic factors, how the proportion to land versus water is going to affect it, with lakes and streams and caves and oceans, ocean depths and all of that stuff, how we get energy from the sun and lose heat to space. All of that is going to affect how life can survive here on Earth. And so that is at the biosphere level. So it's no surprise then that when we take a look at ecology and the environment, that we see, environmental problems that have been caused by human impact. Okay, so as human population grows, as we become more industrialized, we're going to have a bigger impact on the environment. And so what we need to do is we need to know how organisms are going to interact with the environment in order to help solve problems. So if we know how particular organisms are going to, react to a certain chemical that's being leached out from a plant, from a chemical plant, then we can, figure out, how to solve that problem, if we can divert it somewhere else, or if we need to stop it, what's altogether, and filter it out, that kind of thing. So humans are constantly trying to study the environment and study how we have an impact on it. And unfortunately, not too many humans are, as a global human population, not too many are actually concerned about the environment. And so we're going to see how that may affect us later. So we're going to take a look at our in-depth study of ecology, starting with the abiotic factors, the non-living factors in the environment. They're going to affect how living things are going to survive. So in our biosphere, it's pretty patchy, based on local or global scale. It's based on different abiotic factors in the environment, how the temperature is, weather, what chemicals are in the area, that kind of thing. First abiotic factor that is important is sunlight. Okay, in water, most photosynthesis occurs near the surface, right? Because that's, the sunlight can only penetrate so far into the water. And then on land, you definitely have competition for light energy. So, at the poles of the Earth, we're not going to get as much sunlight as we do at the equator. And so we're going to have this kind of competition. And even in, particular areas, you'll have this competition for light. Some trees grow taller, some trees are shorter. They have to kind of poke their heads through to the, sunnier areas and stuff like that. All right, water is another abiotic factor. So aquatic organisms, face water balance issues, and land organisms also face water balance issues. Where to find water, how to find it, what do you do if you don't have any water? So they have to, have particular adaptations, especially if organisms are in, dry desert areas, because they can dehydrate. Temperature is another abiotic factor. Okay, it's going to affect an organism's metabolism. Now, there's usually a specific range of temperature where all organisms kind of are going to be able to survive the best, but some are going to live obviously outside the normal range of temperature. If we're talking about the bacteria and archaea of thermal pools, that is obviously at a really much higher temperature than most other living organisms can survive. And then, if we talk about, the little moss plants and, animals that live in the extreme Arctics, then, those are obviously out of the, normal range as well. So we do have adaptations of organisms that live in extreme temperatures, but mainly organisms are going to live in this kind of normal range. Wind is another abiotic factor. A good thing about wind is that nutrients are blown by wind, right? Seeds are blown by wind, and circulating of carbon dioxide and other chemicals in the air that are good for the organisms. But wind can also damage organisms and environments as well. So we have, depending on where on the globe you are, we've got different jet streams of wind and different pressures creating wind. So we're going to have this, patchiness of wind here and there around the globe. Also, wind, in conjunction with damaging organisms, it also creates water loss. Remember, wind is going to increase the evaporation rates of water. So we're going to want to be careful, with what organisms can survive in really windy areas, are probably those same organisms that have adaptations for dehydration as well. Another abiotic factor are the rocks in the soil and the chemicals that are available in that particular area. So physical structures, chemical composition of rocks and soil are going to limit the distribution of plants and animals that feed on them. Okay, so physical structure meaning high cliff towers and stuff like that. Usually plants and animals cannot live on those, but if you've got nice rolling landscape, we're going to get a lot more living organisms. And also chemical composition. Some areas are really high in nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon. Those main components, those main elements that all living things need. Other places are destitute in those, and so we're not going to see as many living organisms in that area. And finally, the last abiotic factor that we're going to talk about are periodic disturbances that can devastate communities, like fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions. All of these kind of natural disasters are going to definitely affect the communities and organisms that live there. And so we do also have to take into account when natural disaster occurs, how it's going to affect the ecosystem. Now, thankfully, organisms have been created to adapt to their environments, to adapt to these abiotic factors. And there's 3 levels of adaptation. We have physiological, anatomical, and behavioral adaptations. Physiological adaptations are any adaptations that occur in the organism's body to help it survive in their environment. So some occur in seconds and some take longer. For example, if there's no water around, okay, some organisms, their kidneys are going to go into hyperdrive to start, taking as much water out of the urine as possible, okay, in order to, ward off dehydration. And, if it's really cold, organisms like, even humans, shiver and, raise our hairs and fur, okay, in order to stay warm. So these are kind of, some physiological adaptations that some species can have. Now, the longer they take is called acclimation. Okay, so if it takes a few days for something, and you've seen it probably too, if you've gone up to the mountains, you've got to, people say you've got to acclimate to that higher altitude. So at first you're up there, you might get headaches, you might be breathing a little harder because the oxygen content is a lot lower at higher altitudes. But after a few days, your body has gotten used to it. Okay, it's made more red blood cells to account for the lack of oxygen, and so that extra red blood cells is going to make sure that you get all of your cells get enough oxygen, so you've got headaches are lessening and stuff like that over the next couple of days. So that's what we call acclimation. It's going to be related to the range of environmental conditions that an organism naturally experiences, because obviously some organisms are never going to really naturally experience some conditions. Like, for example, humans, if we are caught right underneath a volcanic eruption, there's pretty much no acclimating to that. You're either dead or you can run fast enough that you're alive. There's no way that our bodies can change physiologically so soon in order to survive not melting in the molten lava. Second type of adaptations are the anatomical adaptations. And so environmental changes can lead to change in body shape or anatomy. This is actually occurs in plants more often than animals. So I'm sure you've seen, walk around either, in a forest or even, in a very kind of shaded, patchy area around town that, you've got some trees that'll grow straight up and some trees that will be, growing kind of out to the side and then up. So we get the, different shapes and different contours of trees. Depending on the sunlight that is in that area. And so that's what we kind of call anatomical adaptations, where trees and plants can kind of bend their anatomy towards the light and the nutrients that are needed to grow. Last but not least, the kind of adaptation that we're going to talk about here is called behavioral adaptation. And in this kind of adaptation, animals are going to respond to negative changes in the environment by moving. So we can think of, birds migrating south for the winter, okay, going, away from the cold and flying south to warmer areas is what we call a behavioral adaptation. Dressing appropriately for the weather is, a human adaptation. Also, some humans, especially the older folk, or what they call snowbirds and stuff like that, where they're going to move or migrate to warmer areas when it's also cold outside or when winter hits. So these are what we call behavioral adaptations, and dressing appropriately is obviously unique to humans, since humans are the only ones that actually dress themselves, with extra clothing that's not their own fur. Okay, so we're going to focus now on population ecology, and that is going to take a look at the factors that influence the population number, their growth rate, density, and their population structure. Now, if you remember from earlier back, population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same area at the same time. The population density is the number of individuals of a species per unit area or volume. And so we can measure it a few different ways. You can just go out if you wanted to and measure a particular population density of snails in your backyard. Okay, so you go out and you count how many snails you see. Other, more kind of sophisticated ways are, and I'm sure you've seen this on, animal channels and stuff like that, is the mark and recapture method, where you, capture a particular species, you mark it with a little tag, and you let them go, and you basically are counting up how many you see, and recapturing them, figuring out if the population is increased or decreased in that particular area. So that is population density. Now, scientists have discovered that populations basically are going to inhabit an area in three particular patterns: either clumped, uniform, or random. And clumped pattern is the most common in nature. It's going to result from unequal distribution of resources. So clumped is basically just how you think about it, is little groups of these populations, the same species in particular areas. So a clumped would look, kind of like this. So we've got little clumps all around a particular area. A uniform pattern is going to be kind of, evenly dispersed around a particular area, like we see here. And that's usually going to result from, interactions among the individuals of population. So they're not going to be all huddled, 5, 6, 7 of them aren't going to be kind of huddled into little groups around the area. Like we can think of population, the human population is, clumped within particular houses and neighborhoods and towns and stuff like that. Uniform is all evenly spread out. And random is the last type. And random population patterns result when there's no strong attraction or repulsion among individuals of population. They're just kind of moving in and out of that area kind of randomly. So when looking at population ecology, one of the main things that scientists will look at are the population growth rates. Okay, so now exponential growth model is basically when you've got a whole population that increases by a constant factor during constant time intervals, and it's going to depend on the number of individuals already in a population, and how fast they, basically their population doubles over time. And so an exponential growth rate is going to look like, this graph over here, where we've got, slow kind of growth rate at first, and then bam, it pops up. The more individuals you have and the more time you've got, the faster, it'll grow over time. Now, this exponential growth model is going to give, kind of an idealized picture of unregulated growth of a population. Okay, and that's important because we're going to see that most populations do not undergo unregulated growth. Over long periods of time, exponential growth is actually very rare in nature because something eventually is going to cap the growth of a particular population. It's going to, bring it back down so it's not increasing exponentially over time. And that's exactly what we see here. So exponential growth is, technically possible, but in nature it's not logical. Logistic growth models are going to realize that in nature, one or more factors is going to start limiting the population growth. Okay, so these are, whatever factors that are going to limit population growth is what we call population limiting factors. Okay, so whether it's, if we're talking about the mice population, predators. Predators are obviously going to limit the population growth of mice in a particular area. Carrying capacity is also a very important term to talk about. It's the number of individuals in a population that the environment can maintain. Okay, any more than the carrying capacity and the population starts to decrease. Any less than the carrying capacity and the population can still increase. So populations of different species are going to have different carrying capacities depending on their environment and their the community that they're in. So a better kind of example of a population growth model is this graph right here, where yes, we do have growth over time, but then we have this limiting factor right up here that's going to level off the population density and the population growth and keep it at that carrying capacity. So we can say that the carrying capacity for these male fur seals, okay, is just under 10,000. Okay, so that's what we call the carrying capacity. Now, these two models that we've been talking about, the exponential growth versus the logistic growth, are obviously, theoretical. They're not every population is going to fit them exactly. So we use them as kind of approximations of population growth. Because like I said, once a population under logistic growth, once a population has, hit the carrying capacity, it's going to go up and down and up and down and up and down. It's not going to be like this smooth line where it's, for every one mouse that is born, one mouse dies. It's like it's not that instant. So we have to kind of think of them as theoretical models and know that populations are going to approximately fit these types of models, but not to the T. All right, so let's take a look at some of these, population limiting factors that are going to regulate the population growth of certain species. Now, one type of regulation is called density-dependent factors, and basically, these are what it says in the name. They're going to be dependent on the density of the population. So some of these density-dependent factors include limited food supply and building up of toxic waste around themselves in that area. So it's going to, the greater number of individuals you have, the more that these factors are going to start regulating the population growth. The less numbers in a population, the the less these things are going to matter. So if you've got, plenty of food and not very many species in that area, okay, the food supply is not going to be quite limited yet. As the species continues to grow and grow and grow in population, then the food supply is going to definitely affect the population growth rate as you get more and more dense in that particular area of a species. Now, on the other hand, we have density independent factors. Okay, so that's, these ones are not going to be related to the population density. These are more like abiotic factors that are going to have a effect on population growth. So fire, flood, hurricanes, tornadoes, all those natural kind of disasters that can hit an area are going to be what we call density independent factors, because it doesn't matter if you've got a very low density or a very low population rate, okay, or very low population of species in an area, or very high population of species in the area. A tornado or flood is going to affect all of those. So these are what we call density independent factors. So if we take a look at populations over a long period of time, we're going to see that we're going to have a mix of density dependent and independent factors affecting the population growth. And so what we're going to see is that it actually leads to population cycles. So like I said before, those logistic graphs and exponential graphs are obviously not going to be fit to a T. They are theoretical. In reality, we're going to get these populations of cycles where we have, if we take a look at the graph over here on the right, okay, we have, increase, decrease of populations over time. And if we take a look at, population of, for example, here, snowshoe hares and lynx, okay, the snowshoe hare is the little rabbit there, and the lynx is the cat-type animal. We're going to see that this is a specific predator-prey type of relationship, and their populations are going to mirror kind of each other. Okay, so we're going to see this cycling of, when there's a lot of hare, we get a lot of, the lynx population is going to increase too. When, the hare species, start to be preyed on at a much higher rate because there's a lot more lynx, the hare population goes down. If there's not that much hares around, then the lynx population is also going to kind of go down. So they kind of mirror each other in that sense. Okay, so the one and only organism species that we find that actually has an exponential growth curve, okay, one that's not so far, reaching its carrying capacity or taken over by predation is our human population. Okay, so the human population actually looks like an exponential growth curve. We've had over thousands of years very, very slow growth over time, okay, and then it's just recently that we've kind of picked up our, population growth. And so we do have this exponential curve for human population. Now, there are some natural reasons for that. We don't have any natural predators in our environment. The agricultural society that we have established has, replaced the hunter-gatherer society. So we've, been able to grow and process food for the masses. We don't have to rely on going and getting and hunting our food every day. The Industrial Revolution, again, has made that kind of transition easier as well, and has decreased death rates, especially in infants. We've got improved nutrition and better medical care that is going to, again, increase our lifespan. Okay, so the longer we live, the more kids we, can have, and the higher, the more growth rate our population is going to see. When we study different populations around the world, we can basically put their populations into what's called an age structure. And from those age structures, we can predict the future population growths of humans in different areas. So On the right, we have three different kinds of population growth versus age structures. A rapid population growth is going to be seen by this one right here, where we have lots of young people. Okay, so this is age on the side here, and so we have lots of young people, not very many old people. Obviously, those young people are going to grow older and have lots of kids, so we're going to see a very rapid population growth in that area. The United States, on the other hand, is like this, where we have very slow population growth, where we kind of have this stabilizing number of people throughout the ages. Okay, so we've got kind of the same number of adults as we do kids, and so it's going to be very small or slow growth in the United States. And then the very last one, okay, is found here in Italy. They have actually a decreased population of the young. So we've got a little bit more older people than younger people. So they're actually going to have zero or decreased population growth over time. When we take a look at human populations, we can take a look at what's called a life table. It's going to track survivorship and mortality rates in a population. And so if we graph this data in the table, we get what's called survivorship curves that show the results of these life tables. So basically, at a particular time in, United States history, in fact, this life table shows population in 1999. So in 1999, that was the number of living at the start of 1999. Here's the number of people dying in 1999. So if we take death divided by living, we can get a mortality rate and then the chance of survivalship. So if you in 1999 were between the ages of 10 and 20, you actually had the best survivorship chances, okay, of 0.995. If you were, over 90 years old in the United States in 1999, you were basically dying very soon. Okay, so this is kind of what we see if we take a look at population snapshots over time. Now we can take this data of life tables and we can graph them, and basically we'll get three different types of curves. Type 1 curve is like this red one here. It starts flat due to slow death rates and increases later due to higher death rates in the older people. And this is basically related to larger, more complex species of animals that usually have few young and care for the young for a very long period of time, like humans and monkeys and gorillas and basically the primate species are going to take a look like this, and a lot of actually the mammals as well, whales and dolphins as well. Now type 2 is straight, the straight line right here, and that's due to constant death at whatever age. So it's kind of the same kind of survivorship at whatever age. You're just the older you are, you're just going to keep dying. Now type 3 is this one here, where we have a very high initial death rate, okay, but then it starts to level off. So we see this type of survivorship curve, type 3 survivorship curve, in species that produce very large numbers of offspring, but they don't really care for them. So if you think about the movie Finding Nemo, okay, which I'm sure you've all seen, in Finding Nemo, Nemo's mom and dad have, thousands of eggs that they've laid, right? And there's no way that they're taking care of them all like, we humans take care of our children. It's kind of like when they hatch, okay, you're on your own. Let's, you basically don't have much survival rate. In fact, in the movie, remember, all but one of those little eggs was eaten by some kind macrofish or something. So that's what we call a type 3 survivorship curve. We've got very high initial death rate, but then levels off. Those ones that can survive will survive and level off that that population. And when we take a look at these different survivorship rates of different species, basically there's two kinds of what we call life histories of organisms. We can have opportunistic life histories. Basically, species that are going to follow that type 3 survivorship curve. And basically, you got to take every opportunity to survive. Can't hold back. Nothing's going to kind of stand you where you have to either survive or you die. Versus equilibrial life histories, which are kind of used by those type 1 survivors, those larger type animals that only have a few offspring. They've got obviously they have to take opportunities in the environment to survive, but they're not taking every opportunity. They can have kind of a balance between, okay, I don't have to eat every fish that I see washing onto shore because I know that I am big enough and large enough to go and either hunt more or kill something else or something like that. So that's kind of what we call an equilibrial life history, where they find a balance between doing everything they can to survive versus not doing anything at all. Okay, we kind of have it in the middle ground. So we get these kind of life histories of organisms, as scientists call it. Okay, so that was our taking a look at organisms and populations in ecology. The next lecture is going to talk about communities and ecosystems.